Okay, welcome. Hello, everyone. My name is James Elsmore. I'm the CEO of Island Innovation, and we're really happy to have you all today with our partners, Mana Pacific, who I will also invite up onto the stage now. Just a few quick words about Remo before we get started and tell you a bit more about this session. I think I've spoke to a lot of you individually about how the technology works, but the main thing you need to know is just double click to move your icon between tables, and each table will function like a separate group once we change from presentation mode. And we would encourage you to fill out your profile information. If you click in the top right-hand corner, you'll see a circle with either your photo or the first letter of your name in. And if you click that, you'll see the option for My Profile. And under there, you can add in your company, job title, and, for example, your website or LinkedIn profile. So it can be a bit like a virtual business card. Please note that we are recording the sessions, just so you are aware. And after a brief presentation, we'll be going back into group discussions, and this is a interactive session, so we're really looking forward to learning your different points today. And finally, this will lead into the Island Finance Forum taking place in April. We'll be holding a Pacific Islands Energy Roundtable there, and so if you're attending this focus group, we would encourage you to attend that session also, which will be a similar format but on a larger scale with more people. With that, I will hand over to Joe Reed and John Miller from Mana Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. Really appreciate it. Well, on behalf of Mana Pacific, I'd like to thank all of you for attending today. We, more than anything else, are looking forward to hearing from you about what it is we are trying to do as far as our overall mission as a benefit corporation focused on accelerating renewable energy, resilience, and sustainability objectives for Pacific Island countries and territories. Mana Pacific was founded in 2019. We spent about a year writing our strategic plan, our finance plan, and forming technical partnerships to assist us in reaching out to try to unite the Pacific Islands through a Trans-Pacific Agreement that is focused on uniting them similar to a European Union, but a Pacific Union that allows them to have increased buying power, much more than a single island might have of its own, but at the same time to establish a standard approach to doing sustainability and renewable energy projects across the islands. With a standardized approach, working hand in hand with the Pacific Power Association, our objective is to address the way that renewable energy projects will be done on all of the islands throughout the region. In doing so, with this type of agreement and this type of improved united buying power, we will also make the projects, we suspect, quite a bit more bankable, easier to find the kind of capital needed to launch the project, and a better guarantee of a return on the investment for the capital that is invested. But only those of you that are with those capital sources will be able to concur or confirm that as we move forward. So I'd like to introduce John Miller. John was one of the two co-founders of Mana Pacific. John is in our Maui office along with the rest of the Mana Pacific team. And John, I'll just let you pick up from there, if you would, please.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Aloha, talofa, bula, and welcome, and thank you so much for coming. As always, I'm super excited to have you guys here today. Well, previous roundtables have been much larger gatherings we've had together, where we incorporated many of the key intersecting components, such as acquiring most favored nation pricing from a lot of the tier 1 manufacturers. We also worked on master planning between the different Pacific Islands, and later we'll be tackling many of the geopolitical issues that we'll face and hurdles that will stand in our way. The primary driver of this initiative has been and will always be, as it is for most developing nations, is gaining access to capital and meaningful capital. Since many of the Pacific Islands are very small countries, and oftentimes in a global size scale, they look more like cities or smaller corporations. So these are the challenges we need to face and we need to solve. So with these smaller groups, we think that we might be able to have more deeper dives in this conversation and really address this and tackle some of the problems that we really face so that we can later find solutions. So for those of you who don't know how this started, as Joe said, I'm only one of the co-founders of this initiative, as well the many people that have come along the journey and provided a lot of insight and networking that have been extremely immensely enlightening. For me, this started, years back. I went to American Samoa, U.S. territory. And in American Samoa, the reason we wanted to help down there is 70% of the population there is below the federal poverty line. And they also had some of the highest electricity rates in 2012, as high as 49 cents a kilowatt hour. Well, most of the greater United States, for example, was paying 11 cents a kilowatt hour for energy. So through that time, we built some renewable energy projects for the U.S. Department of Interior, and helped them accelerate the adoption of renewable energy. But what was more important is I fostered a relationship with the executive director and CEO, Utu A. Malai. And for those who don't know, Utu is considered the protector of Polynesia and Greater Pacific Islands he helped save. In American Samoa, they called him the godfather of Samoa. And that was because Utu, had a really different way of viewing things. And he'd spent his whole life serving those who needed help and giving them a voice and empowering them. So through that time, we learned a lot of the challenges they face. And Utu's, explained that, one of the greatest challenges all Pacific Islands face was access to capital. And that's kind of why that's the forefront of what we're trying to do here. But some of the other challenges that he faced was, the pricing materials and equipment is extremely expensive for the Pacific Islands, sometimes costing as much as 150 to 200%, that we would pay in the greater Europe and Asia. And then the other problems that he faced was, basically large collaboration amongst these 22 Pacific Island countries and territories, which encompass over 6,000 inhabited islands, making collaboration very difficult. So 17 years ago, Utu formed the Pacific Power Association with 11 of his friends and other colleagues who are also CEO managers and of the Pacific Island utilities. And through that, they've kind of built this consortium of sharing ideas and technology and empowering them together. So what we're trying to do is basically take this one step further and empower the Pacific Power Association, as well as bring greater collaborators from across the globe to help this cause. And Utu wasn't the first person, and he's certainly never going to be the last person to be asking for this help. As many of you know, since this time, the Pacific Island leaders and have been asking the world, even on the UN stage in the Paris Climate Agreement, asking for help and collaboration from world leaders, from industry leaders, from universities and subject matter experts to help them unite the Pacific Islands and help them bring them solutions. Because very well, not only can we help the Pacific Islands, who actually are the front lines of climate change crisis that we currently face, many of these islands, can be the best case examples that we can show the rest of the world of how to tackle climate change, how to tackle the transition to renewable energy. And if we can do it in some of the most impoverished nations, I think then we can really show that our first world nations will be able to address this. So I thank you all for joining this. And I want you to remember that this is a collaboration event, and we're not asking you to just validate our thoughts and our ideas and what we put together so far. We want this to truly be a curative event where all of you guys are helping us curate the solutions and bring in the ideas. And really, this is a networking event to get to know one another. And later we'll reach out, and we'd like you to participate in future roundtables, our Pacific Island Finance Forum in April, of course, and later on, and helping us curate some more of the details of this, because this is truly an initiative that we want everybody to be a part of. We want it to belong to everybody. So again, thank you guys for coming, and I look forward to working together with you guys here in the future. Aloha.
Yeah, thanks very much, John. Just before we break out on the tables, I want to points. Right now, Mono-Pacific as a team is working a small handful of renewable energy projects already. And what we want to stress today is that our primary objective is first to try to learn and share with the different utilities across all the islands what your expectations are. We want to learn from you, and we want to share with our team members, as well as have you share with each other what your expectations are. Case in point, last week's session, we talked about regional coordination between the different islands and the different utilities, and the help that the Pacific Power Association is providing for those different utilities. This week, we're hoping that there's some bit of magic that each of you have about access to capital that you can share with your peers. And certainly that we can evangelize on your behalf to talk about that source of capital to accelerate project development and sustainability and energy independence on other islands. We're about to break down into our table groups. You'll notice there's 3 different subject labeled tables. One is talking about traditional project finance and power purchase agreements, the normal capital stack for a project development with an investor and an off-taker for the power. The second table is talking about the government, international, or other creative funding sources that may exist, both grants in some cases, as well as low interest investment equity. So we'll be talking about that on table 2. On the third table, it's talking about project investment returns, return on investments over a certain time period. And on all 3 of the tables, there's no limit to what we can talk about, except perhaps my imagination or yours. So we look forward to sharing with you, and we'll see you on each of the tables. James, if you could go ahead and shuffle the deck. Thank you.
Sorry, Joe, I cut you off there as we were talking in our group. I'll just bring you up to the stage now. I hope everyone was able to have some good conversations in those groups. I was enjoying that. You can go ahead and ask that question again now, Joe.
That's okay. Why don't you, if you would, call Kath Cooksley up to the auditorium as well. I'll go ahead and ask her in front of everybody. So John, coming from Hawaii and coming from the U.S., I'll give a little background to Kath before I put her on the spot with the question. We were talking to a solar manufacturer, a solar module manufacturer in Australia. We were talking about standardizing the approach to doing project development in the Pacific Islands. And, in general, we said, look, we want to make sure that everything from recycling to employing, building labor on the island to support the projects, operations and maintenance done by the people on the island where possible, a complete approach to doing the project. We wanted to put that in our Trans-Pacific Agreement that all projects across these islands would be done in a similar manner. And so when I mentioned that we were going to try to standardize projects, the feedback I got was all the Pacific Islands will follow the Australian New Zealand standard, and it's already there, so you don't need to go do what you're doing. And so, to an extent, I didn't. The purpose of the question was really, does Australia and New Zealand, and again, I'm sure it's hard to speak on behalf of all Australians and New Zealanders, do they view the South Pacific as theirs? And that whether you're coming from, from Asia or whether you're coming from North America, you need to clear your lanes and your gates, or do they view it as an allies trying to do the right things for all the Pacific?
I would say it's very different between New Zealand and Australia. So in New Zealand, you would have, there are more Samoans living in New Zealand than there are in Samoa, similar with Niue. So as a small nation that New Zealand is, the Pacific is very much like a brother or sister. So culturally, you have like language weeks. So you've got Niue language weeks, like all the languages in school, you begin to learn it. So it's seen that way. In Australia, it's very different. So there's more of a disconnect in terms of everyday Australians and the Pacific.
Oh, that's very helpful.
And to her point, and just to back up to that point is I've actually come across that from standardization point of view, I'm not going to name names, but different engineers and utility managers that are under the U.S. system have all expressed the desire to kind of go ahead with the Pacific and New Zealand type electrical code and standardization. So I've definitely seen that.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Kath. And again, I appreciate you speaking on behalf of the New Zealanders, at least, because I think that what we're trying to make sure is that everybody feels welcome. Everybody that wants to help combat climate change, help promote renewable energy and resiliency of the islands. One of our stakeholders, we call him kind of a family member at this point, on Molokai, essentially says, we have all the resources we need. We just need to focus on using the resources we have. We don't need a bunch of diesel coming from anywhere, okay? We've got all the sun we can use. We've got the water. We just need to use it correctly. And we look to learn to be able to do better in helping them achieve those goals as we move across.
Yeah. So I don't think neither New Zealand nor Australia feel like they've got ownership, if that makes sense. So from my kind of interactions, both at a regional and at a government level, it's very open in terms of who's coming through. I think, if anything, both Australia and New Zealand have felt, I guess, that level of responsibility in terms of our proximity, in terms of looking after. So it is when, I guess, different events occur, like cyclones, there's a very strong relationship, but that's not to say others can't come in and enter.
Well, thanks so much, Kath. I appreciate the comments. James, can you invite William Blank and Greg Lopez up next? I'd like to ask them to speak just for a moment on two things that they talked about in the breakout tables, if you don't mind. Thanks again, Kath. So William, if you could take a moment just to introduce yourself and talk about the Australian infrastructure, AIFFP, infrastructure financing facility for the Pacific.
Yeah, okay. So again, my name is William Blank. I'm the executive committee member for the Australia Pacific Islands Business Council. We're essentially a member-based organisation made up of Australian-based businesses and also Pacific Island businesses. And also my day job, I work for Hall Contracting, a dredging and marine civil organisation in Australia, but we have a presence in Fiji, been operating in the Pacific for close to 20 odd years and been doing a lot of infrastructure projects. So very infrastructure based, on the ground person that's had physical experience of doing these projects in the Pacific. So yeah, I'll just touch on the AIFFP. Obviously, we've been following it for a while, and I made mention previously in the working groups that Australian government's put in a Pacific Step Up program, which this AIFFP is on top of the normal bilateral program that we have. It's a $2 billion financing facility, 1.5 billion of concessional financing, and 500 million of grants, and it's to provide an additional financing source to the existing, whether it be bilateral or multilateral development bank finance. It's very much, focused around renewables, infrastructure, also water utilities, and ICT, I think, are the main focus points, but you can find a lot of information on aiffp.com.au. So if you just type that into your Google search, you'll find that there. So yeah, we sit on the head contractor panel. So it's arrangement of all different contractors that actually execute the works. Obviously, they'll be pre-feed by consultants, which there's numerous different international consultants and Australian-based consultants, New Zealand consultants, and the same thing with the contractors. So that gets renewed every 5 years, the panel. So essentially, once these projects come to fruition, essentially these programs will get sent out to the head contractors and to essentially price, and then it will execute from there. However, they're very open, and you'll see on their webpage, they're very open to hear from other organisations about direct private investment. They're very, very open. There's no specific way that you need to access this. You essentially just put your project forward, and they essentially have a team in Canberra that will unpack it and to see if they can assist in any way. So it's obviously got to meet their specific mandate. But yeah, I really encourage everyone to go on the website there and really unpack it. But I know the guys quite personally, and I've spoken to our Minister for International Development in the Pacific. He's very motivated on this initiative. But again, we see ourselves as almost the big brother of the Pacific, and we're very, very keen, as well as our New Zealand neighbours, keen to make sure we're helping out and fighting this climate change, issue that we're having and will continue to have for a long time.
Thanks, William. Really appreciate it. I was going to have Greg Lopez come up and talk about the Climate Action Fund, but we'll send out a little bit about that in the report that we've sent out following today's meeting. But Francis, if you could talk just a little bit about the project that you have pending with funding from the World Bank, just a kind of a thumbnail sketch about what its current status is and where you think it's going.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, it's still in the planning phase. I'll be heading towards the Ministry of Environment. They've now created a new ministry for the government of the Marshall Islands, the Ministry of Environment, that looks at climate change and energy issues. So yeah, as I mentioned, it's still in the planning phase, and I'll be heading there to learn more about it.
Well, thanks, Francis. And again, the key point is that that's obviously another good source is the World Bank and the funding that they're providing. So I was glad to hear about that in our breakout session. And so, James, we'll go ahead and start some closeout remarks. If you could bring John back up on stage, I'll go ahead and make a couple of remarks, and then I'll turn it back over to John to finish. Again, regardless of whether we have 20 people or whether we have 5 or 6 people on the forum, it's amazing what we learn. And I was sorry to put Kath on the spot asking a couple of political questions, but I'm sure that it's good to kind of break the ice on that, because next week we'll also be discussing geopolitical concerns with different types of funding sources. And the plain simple fact, I was about to share that Canadian Solar, one of the companies I worked with in the past, took the approach of, well, money's money. And if it's going to help us develop a project and it's going to help accelerate climate action and get the job done, it really didn't matter where the money came from. Well, to some people it does. And in this particular case, we're hoping that we bring enough variety of solutions to tailor exactly the right solution for whatever the island's objectives are, without trying to suggest the way they should do business. Because each island, as was so richly put out in today's comments, is different. Big difference. As a matter of fact, we were talking about the differences between Papua New Guinea and I forget what the other comparison. Oh, Tavut. I'm going to mess it up, John. I couldn't get the A before the U. A significant difference, and islands that have a lot of land, agricultural land, and islands that don't have different needs. Islands that have plenty of water, drinkable water, and islands that don't obviously have different needs. And right now, I think what Maui's deciding is it's got about all the water it needs with the 19 inches of rain that it had yesterday and today. But we look forward to having you all back, certainly on the 14th of April for our roundtable. We will join the capital discussions that we had today, access to capital, with regional coordination participants and with the geopolitical participants, as well as those who are in the business of building projects and providing materials for renewable energy projects. But as we move across the Pacific Islands, moving westward from our office in Maui, we look forward to learning so that we can serve you better. We look forward to trying to accelerate each of the islands' sustainability and resiliency goals as we accomplish the objectives of getting you energy independence. And John, I'll let you close on that note.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Joe. And just echo what you said. I think these groups have been amazing. And even when the smaller ones or larger ones, there's no shortage of great ideas and great feedback and information we're getting. So thank you all for participating. As Joe said, we come back for at least the April event. If not, if you've been invited to the geopolitical one, we'd love to see you there. But we'll be in touch later on to bring you into more interesting groups. And hopefully soon we'll be able to release the names of the speakers that'll be at the April event. But thanks again for coming and for your participation. And I appreciate it so much. Aloha.